Thank you for joining us. Um, my name is Nola. I'm the technical manager for this session. Um, and the session is the approaches to studying the entire food value chain in agri-food research. And we are joined and chaired by Ayala Weineman, Shivani Garg, and Eward Mushi, who are joining us here today. Um, Thank you for taking part in ANH 2026, and we look forward to a robust and interactive session today. A quick reminder that everything that you might need to access the conference materials and program can be found on the ANH Academy website. Before I pass it over to Ayala, who will take the conversation forward, a few technical announcements to ensure that we have a smooth and interactive experience. Um, First of all, the session will be recorded and we'll post it on the ANH Academy website before the end of the conference, and that'll be at the unique site for this learning lab. Second, all participants are muted upon entry, but please do introduce yourself using the chat feature and let us know your name, where you're joining us from, and what organization that you work with. We encourage you to share your video if your bandwidth allows. And if you have questions, we ask you to share them in the chat throughout the session. Um, and if at any point you experience technical issues, please check your audio settings and your internet connection, and you can always try to reconnect using that same Zoom link that you originally joined with. Any other technical questions, you can send me a private message using the chat feature. Great. Thank you so much, and I will pass it over to you, Ayala.
Thanks everyone for being here for this learning lab about how we can maintain a view of the entire food value chain in agri-food research. We will get into the motivation and setting the stage for this in just a moment, but we actually wanted to start with some introductions, if that sounds okay. Hopefully this won't be too chaotic, but the hosts, myself, Shivani, and Eward, would like to introduce ourselves quickly. And I also want to ask some of the people that I see in this list who are in the room to introduce themselves if you feel comfortable doing that. We'll see how it goes. But as we'll discuss in a moment, one of the main goals of this learning lab is not only to learn, but also to make connections amongst the people who are here to grow our networks respectively and to figure out how we might work together or be supportive of one another. So just a quick introduction. My name is Ayala Weinman. I work with both the Global Child Nutrition Foundation as well as Michigan State University. And with the Global Child Nutrition Foundation, my focus is on school feeding programs. Shivani, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure, thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Shivani Gharge. I am a research coordinator with the Global Child Nutrition Foundation. GCNF provides governments and their partners with the tools, knowledge, and connection to build and strengthen their school feeding programs that contribute to national educational, agricultural, nutrition, and health goals. One of our flagship programs is the Global Survey of School Meal Programs, which collects comprehensive and standardized data on large-scale school feeding initiatives worldwide. I'm really excited to be a part of this learning lab. It's a great opportunity, I think, to exchange ideas, make new connections, reflect on our experiences, and I look forward to our conversations and insights that we will build together. Over to you, Eward.
Hello, everyone. My name is Eward Mushi. I'm a PhD student of agricultural economics from Sokoine University of Agriculture in Tanzania. I also work with the University of Dar es Salaam as an assistant lecturer. So my current research project is on the food environment and food choices. So I'm looking forward to an interesting discussion. Thank you.
Okay, so we do have quite a few people in the room, but let's at least get some introductions going. And you're also welcome to drop into the chat who you are and even your email address if you feel comfortable doing that. Beatriz, would you feel comfortable introducing yourself?
Yeah, hi. My name is Beatrice. I'm calling from Madrid, but I'm currently a student at the University of Plymouth, and I'm studying marine biology and coastal ecology. So it's very different. But due to a microplastic conference that or a seminar that was hosted by some of the people at NAH, I decided to join this and meet more scientists and like-minded people. So yeah, I'm really excited to hear this session.
Thanks. And we will be talking about the environmental implications of food value chains. Let's get a few more people. Winston, do you feel comfortable introducing yourself? If not, let's go to Afua Atuobi Yabua. Are you here and able to introduce yourself?
Right. Hello, everyone. I hope I'm audible enough. This is Ifwa Atiubi, and I am from the University of Ghana. Um, I'm happy to be part of the Learning Lab for this session.
Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much. Marit Meyer, are you present and able to introduce yourself?
I am. I'm just checking whether I can also show my face a bit, but maybe that's okay. Let's see. Hi. Hi, I'm Marit. I'm a PhD candidate at the Rural Sociology Group at Wageningen University in the Netherlands. I'm also a lecturer, and I research urban food markets in Kenya. So I'm quite excited to be there. I'm very interested in the logistics of it all. So I'm quite excited about your focus on the hidden middle, as you call it. Yeah.
Thanks very much. Sunitha Kadiyala, can you introduce yourself if you're on? Yeah.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for doing this Learning Lab iLearn team. I'm Sunita Karyala from the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, and I'm the principal investigator of the ANH Academy. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Sarthak Agarwal, can you please introduce yourself if you're online?
Yes, absolutely. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarthak, and I am a PhD student at Harvard University School of Public Health. I'm focusing on school feeding programs in India, the US, and Tanzania. And yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Just a couple more. Bayu Ariyawan, can you, you already introduced yourself when there were very few in the room, but are you able to say hi to
Yeah,
everyone?
thank you, Madam Ayala. I introduce myself. My name is Ahmad. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good morning in Africa. My name is Ahmad Bayu Aryawan. I am an employee and practitioner in animal product technology. I am master's alumna in Faculty of Animal Science, Halu Oleo University, Kendari, Southeast Sulawesi of Indonesia. Nice to meet you too.
Okay. Thank you very much. So great
You're
to have you
welcome, Madam.
here. Okay, maybe one more. Ernest Molua, are you around and able to introduce yourself?
Yes. I'm able to introduce myself. I'm Ernest. Let me put on my video. I'm a professor of agricultural economics from the University of Buea in Cameroon. My research is on climate change and African agriculture. So and also on the food value systems. So this is a learning lab which I found very interesting for capacity building and to share new ideas and do some network with some other colleagues. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks very much. So sorry that we can't get to everybody for introductions, but we will have breakout rooms later to an opportunity to get to know each other a bit more intimately. We do want to have lots of participation and to hear lots of voices over the next hour and a half. So hopefully we will have a chance to make connections. And as we will emphasize, again and again, one of the goals of this learning lab is to learn about one another and sort of establish these important connections. So let me share my screen. Is everybody able to see my screen?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. All right. So the focus, as you know, of this learning lab is various approaches to studying the entire food value chain in agri-food research. Just to recap or set the stage for why are we here? First, we're here to explore some questions, and here are the questions that we'll explore. First, why is it worthwhile or valuable to give attention to the entire length of an agri-food value chain? So within one research project, maintaining a view of the whole value chain, why is that a valuable approach? Second, what are some, on a more practical side of things, what are some methodological options for studying an entire agri-food value chain within one project? And then once we have a lens that sort of embraces the entirety of an agri-food value chain, what are some research questions that can be addressed? What are some creative and interesting questions that we could then answer? And the second reason we are here is to connect with one another. So again, we really want to hear lots of voices, and I do hope there will be lots of participation. We've made a lot of room for that in the program. What is the agenda today? I think the agenda has 6 components. First, we're going to talk about what is the structure of an agri-food value chain with some examples. We'll talk about this together, and you can also problematize it if you see any problems. We'll do a little bit of brainstorming about how the structure of a product's value chain can have implications for food safety, for nutrition, for environment, and also for socioeconomic inclusivity. If you are interested in designing your own research project that takes a value chain perspective, what are some options for researching the full length of a value chain? This section of the Learning Lab is a little bit more like a lecture, but we will still make room for some conversation. Shivani will provide an overview of the school milk program in Uganda, and that will be the basis for some breakout room conversations where we will really think about what research questions we could ask. And here, here's the challenge. Let's say you were given a pot of money to study about the school milk to study about the school milk program in Uganda, and you yourself are interested in the value chain. What are some research questions that you could ask that would be useful for the program? And then we'll conclude. Okay, so just to set the stage, and some of you may know this, some of you may be less familiar with this background. Over the course of economic development, agri-food value chains generally evolve over time. This is stating it a little bit in simple terms, but they generally move from relatively simple to relatively more complex. Although at later stages of this evolution, there is consolidation with a smaller number of very large firms accounting for a larger share of the activity. As food systems evolve, there tends to be more and more activity in the midstream. And what do we mean by the midstream? The segments of the value chain that are found between production and consumption. So everything that happens to food that moves it from the farm to the kitchen. While a lot of research and policy attention has been directed to both the production and consumption nodes, some of you may have worked, for example, with the LSMS ISA datasets, which have provided a phenomenal resource for studying about farming around the world. And there's also a lot of studies about consumption. What do people eat and why? What drives their food choices? But there has been far less attention given to the midstream. And this is why it is sometimes referred to as the hidden middle. So it exists, it is important, but it has been hidden in the policy discussion and also in research. And what this means is that when you are looking for a research topic, for example, some of you that we heard in the introductions are students. So if you're looking for a topic for a thesis or dissertation, giving attention to the hidden middle is innovative. It's relatively overlooked compared to some other topics. And so it can make your research interesting and really value adding to the body of knowledge that we have. So what is the structure of an agri-food value chain? We know there are producers that produce the food and consumers that consume, but what is found between production and consumption? Looking for your participation here. Let's see if I can make this work. So let's think about maize. We have maize farmers, we have consumers of maize. What are some activities or some segments or nodes of the value chain that are found between production and consumption? Does anyone have any ideas? Please raise your hand if you are brave and willing to suggest some ideas. Anyone?
I wanted to say.
This is Ernest speaking. Ernest Mulwa. You.
Okay. If it's possible to raise your hand, that would be great. And Ernest, what do you think about what's found between production and consumption?
Yes, I was thinking. I was going to suggest on transportation and storage for now.
Okay. Good. So transportation of maize, storage of maize, warehouses. What do you think? Marit Meyer, what are your thoughts?
When I was working in Kenya, I got really interested in these small scale millers. I think they call it posho mills, which I immediately thought of. It's close to the consumers, but it's still, I think, maybe a more hidden middle in that sense.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, exactly. So posho millers, people themselves will bring their maize to the posho millers to have their maize milled or ground up as a service for fee. And let's see, so there are posho millers, which are small, and then there are probably large millers as well. Anybody else have other ideas for what is found between production and consumption? Raghav.
Hi, so we study, I'm a researcher at Tata Cornell Institute at Cornell University, and we've been studying the maize value chain in India. And I think what's fascinating about the maize value chain, particularly in low-income countries, is once the producers have produced it, so there's a lot of distributors. So rather than go straight to the market, you have small village level traders, and then you have the big traders in the towns and cities. And then in India, you have a government system where there's a wholesale market. There are also private wholesale markets. So just the distribution umbrella of.
Yeah. Okay. And it's interesting because you mentioned several kinds of traders, small traders, wholesalers, and each of those can be considered its own node. So even trade can be disaggregated into multiple segments or nodes of the value chain. Anybody else have any thoughts on what can be found between production and consumption for maize?
Hello.
Hi, Dr.
Yeah,
Sanjivani.
Sanjeev. Depending on the quality of the maize, the cost will be decided. So there will be some quality control department somewhere in between.
Quality control, absolutely. An important activity between production and consumption. So let's see if we got all of these. I think so. We didn't, I mean, I think it was Raghav who, well, talked about wholesale markets. We didn't mention retail. Ernest talked about storage, the role of cooperatives in terms of working with producers in order to get the maize moving down the value chain can be important. All right, so we've talked about maize. Now let's think about tomatoes. Are there any activities between production and consumption that are unique to tomatoes, which we did not already mention for maize? Any thoughts about what happens to tomatoes that can be unique?
May I suggest something?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
If at all there is a lot of production, then there is a wastage. So something has to be done before that, which we have seen in our countries in some places. If at all there is too much of tomatoes grown in particular area, then of course the cost reduces for the farmers and it's a loss. So sometimes they prefer to throw it or give it to the cows or buffaloes and so on. So
Okay.
instead of that, if it can be used and made some other things.
Okay. So a secondary market, if it's not moving to human consumption, it can be diverted for some other purpose. Anybody else have a thought about what happens to tomatoes between production and consumption? Raghav, do you have another thought about this?
Sure. So I think we also missed something in the maize value chain, which was processing. I know there was millers, but there's also, I'm trying to remember what it's called, DDGS, uh, the part that goes to cattle feed, etc. But connecting that to tomatoes, I think, what was just mentioned, cold storage, which is
Cold storage.
used for maize, but also a lot more opportunities for processing. So tomato sauce, ketchup, tomato paste. Again, I would say that maize also has some value addition opportunities, but I guess because this is a perishable, more quickly perishable item, there are more value addition opportunities and pressures in
Right.
storage.
So that's a good point. So because tomatoes are highly perishable, it's imperative that something is done with them. Not necessarily moving to livestock feed, but it can also lower quality tomatoes can go into the processing node if it's not going to be sold as fresh tomatoes. Does anyone have any other thought? Maybe one more thought about tomatoes? Nola?
I'll just read out a few of the comments from the chat. But we have from Sanjukta mentioned conversion into pulp and canned tomatoes, which I guess was already mentioned a little bit as well. Afua mentioned processing, including canning and drying, bagging, storage, transportation, middlemen, and retailers. Sanjukta also said harvesting of seeds to be used for further cultivation. And then Sunita just added sorting and grading.
Awesome. So sorting of tomatoes, very important. So this has been a great, you put together a much more creative set of activities than what we have on the screen right now. Thank you for putting thought into that. Just one more, a little bit different this time, for milk. So milk is different from tomatoes, it's different from maize. Are there any activities between production and consumption of milk that you think that we can just highlight as the hidden middle of the milk value chain? Sanjukta?
I think probably one of the most important ones is pasteurization.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, that is really an important consideration with milk, totally different from other products. Does anyone have any other thoughts about milk? Bayu?
Yeah, Madam Ayala, we have milking way. It means in pemerahan to output to make output of product milk before we pasteurize in medium temperature in scale uh, in medium scale.
Okay. Sorry, what is the activity in one word? Sorry to ask you to, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean milking way or pemerahan in Indonesia like pemerahan. Yeah.
Formula? Is that what I'm understanding?
Yeah, about yeah, it means like it means about the milk products, the milk produce from cow or goat. Physiology.
Okay. Thank you very much. Do we have any one more thought
You're
about?
welcome.
Huh? Sorry.
You're welcome, Maya.
Thank you, Bayu. Does anybody else have any one more thought about milk? Well, what happens along the milk value chain that might be unique and worth highlighting? Sunita Chandorkar.
Yes. So in India, we have essentially two major value chains of milk. So once it is produced, a smaller or shorter value chain is it is sold within the village or the town, not generally cities. So that is, it's just produced. The producer himself goes and delivers it to various homes.
Yeah.
And it does not need any specific processing or chilling, etc. But there is a longer value chain where it is collected. This is through the cooperatives. This milk cooperative is a huge movement in India, especially in Gujarat, the state from which I come. So here it is collected at a center. Several such centers, they have chilling units. They look at the fat content. Based on the fat content, the farmers or producers are paid based on the fat content of the milk. From each collection center, then the insulated transportation carries it to a major center where it is again tested. A high acidity milk will go for directly some butter production or ghee, which is again a very common byproduct, and the rest will go for processing, generally pasteurization, packaging, and again cold storage, and then again transportation. Yeah, so that is in a nutshell the value chain that the milk follows. Two
Very
basic
good.
value chains. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for all that description about what happens in India, but also these two paths that milk can take. And you mentioned cold storage, but milk can also be made. It needs a cold chain.
Yes.
But eventually, it could be processed also into something that is shelf stable. So whether it needs a cold chain through to the point of consumption or not can also vary. So I think we've put some good thought into what is found in the agri-food value chain. Something that's a little bit more abstract now. How can what we're asking here is for just some thoughts about how can the structure of a product's value chain, all of these nodes that we talked about, and whether it's a short value chain or a longer value chain for milk, how can the structure of a product's value chain have implications for, and we have a few different topics here, but how can it have implications for food safety? Does anyone have any thoughts on this? Nola.
Thinking maybe whether they're able to use refrigeration along the whole entire value chain.
Yep. Okay, so whether there is a cold chain found in the milk value chain or the tomato value chain can have definitely implications for food safety. Any other thought about value chain structure and food safety? Raghav?
I'm cheering because I attended the previous session on food safety and they discussed milk, fish, and vegetables. But I think the formality of it, so if it's a formal value chain, there are more chances of checks and balances.
Okay.
There was also a point about just the use, in terms of if it's like a large scale farm and, they can have more interventions and they can monitor what pesticide uses, whereas
Right.
informal, how do you monitor, things like pesticide use or just how long they've been, exposed to different pathogens, etc.
Yeah, so you keyed in on something really important, which is whether the scale of actors, so larger scale and smaller scale actors, can have a different situation of food safety. So the structure of the value chain is inclusive of who is part of the value chain and who is not. And scale can have a big impact on food safety. Sanjukta, do you have a thought that you can share?
Yeah, so I was thinking about in terms of, say, storage and warehousing. So you would have to look at the quality of the warehouses to make sure you don't have insects or pests entering, or
Absolutely.
especially if during like the monsoon season, you have to pay special attention to the possibility of fungus and other things growing on the raw materials. So yeah.
Yep. So there are elements of food safety found at these various nodes. It's not only the farm and the consumer, but everything that happens in between. Amanda, last thought on food safety. What are you what's on your mind?
I was just thinking in relation to milk, and again, because the more the variety of processing that can be done with each product, whether it's tomatoes or milk, milk if it's being dried versus staying liquid form, being the proteins are being extracted for like an infant formula, all the different types of food safety that would be required at each of those different types of products.
Yep. Very good point. So different products have a different path and different needs for food safety. Can the structure of a product's value chain have implications for nutrition? Can you think of a way that there can be a nutrition angle? Sanjukta? Thanks.
Hi. Maybe with milk, it could be, for example, fortifying it with additional nutrients.
Okay.
Or something else. That could be one thing.
Yeah, so fortification is, can be part of processing, and whether fortification is present or not in a given milk value chain. And we heard about those two paths for milk in India. One is short and one is long. Probably there's a difference in the likelihood of fortification. I want to offer another thought, which is the geography of the geography of a product's value chain can have implications for nutrition, because if retailers are present in a given area, they are making the food an option for the local population. If retailers of a given product are not present, then it's not accessible to the population. Okay, next topic is I want to define this. Socioeconomic inclusivity refers to whether the value chain is inclusive of lots of types of actors, especially those who are less advantaged. So is the value chain inclusive of relatively small actors, relatively poorer actors? Is it an opportunity for actors to generate income and pursue economic mobility or not? So how can the structure of a value chain have implications for socioeconomic inclusivity? Marit.
Yes, so the first thing that comes to mind is that oftentimes intermediaries are a bit demonized,
Okay,
even
okay.
though they also, yeah, that's for driving up the food prices, right? So if there's many chains within, or many keys within the value chain, then they're driving up the food prices by adding, their slice of the cake to each of the stages. But at the same time, they bring food closer to home in many times, in many cases, and I think we should appreciate them a bit more. Maybe
Sure.
I'm speaking from the East African context now, but I know that, for example, I'm hearing a lot of people here from India as well, and I've heard that in India, these aggregators and these distributors are actually really, really important to bringing food closer to open air markets or closer to homes as well. So
Okay.
that's the first thing that comes to mind. Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that thought. Yeah, I mean, I think we're here today to talk about the midstream of value chains because, like you said, they do serve an important function. And you're right that they have historically been demonized from the, let's say, from the perspective of farmers, they can seem, I guess, like they're not paying enough. And from the perspective of consumers, they can seem to be a cause of high prices. But the midstream actors do play a really important role in making a value chain function. And as you said, making food available to consumers. Last topic on this page. How can the structure of a product's value chain have implications for the environment? Anyone? Amanda.
I would just say, thinking about storage, are there pesticides or things like that that might come into play from an environmental perspective, uh, and their contamination in the environment? And then also the amount of transportation that's required would have an environmental impact as well.
Yeah, two very good points. And when it comes to the use of pesticides, how are they being used and who is using them properly versus not? And like you said, with transportation, I really like that because food that travels a longer distance will have a different type of impact on the environment. Any one last thought about the environment? We have Sanjukta. And if there's somebody who hasn't spoken yet, feel free to raise your hand as well. Sanjukta, what can you add?
Yeah, so at every stage of the supply chain, there would be waste being produced in some form, right? Like
Waste.
after
Okay.
collecting the raw material itself, there will be some waste produced, and especially in the processing plants, especially when you're doing value addition, such as canning or making pulp or some other products, there would be so much waste being generated from it. So how is that waste being used? Is it just being emitted into any close by water source, or is it being sort of treated in some way that?
Yep.
I would like to add something as well. I don't know why I can't access my hand raising button, so I'm just waiting until everyone shares their thoughts. But in something more particular to my world, plastics and the store when it comes to packaging, say for example with crisp packaging, it's been seen that you have to use quite a lot of plastic for the amount of crisps that are inside a package. And thinking about how we can reduce our plastic consumption and reduce our waste, one of the things is thinking about how long we actually think these products are going to be on the shelf. So if we think a crisp packet might be bought within 3 months, then why do we need it to last 2 years? Why do we need it to be have so much airspace? Is there a way of decreasing the packaging and the storage that we're implementing for some products that are daily uses, right? Or do we need something as durable as plastic to put milk in, for example, when maybe we can just refill milk jugs, like in some areas of the UK, you just have the milkman come and fill up your glass jars to your house and stuff. So I think that's a factor.
Thank you. Thanks for adding those thoughts. Sorry about the hand raising difficulty. Really good thoughts about plastics, packaging, and when it comes to food loss and waste, you can imagine if you maintain a view of the whole value chain, you would be able to evaluate how much loss occurs at each node and where does the loss occur. That's not something you can do if you don't have a vision of or a view of the whole value chain. Kate Jones, can you add something about environment?
Sure, I will try to. So there, in terms of the structure of a value chain and then the implications to the environment, we see that so as consumers or potentially even as like from the point of view of like manufacturers, there are certain, say, standards or norms that we would like our food to meet in terms of the stewardship of the environment in the making, the storing, the processing, the plastic use of that product. And if and there are also certain kind of standardizations that those value chains sort of like have to be followed. But what I see tending to happen is that then each actor in that supply chain thinks about um, meeting those standards or meeting those desires from the consumer point of view or from the person that they're selling to. And what they will do is think about how they can ensure that their own suppliers meet those standards and meet the needs of their customers. So what you get is the movement of that kind of environmental stewardship or thought kind of moving up the supply chain back towards the producers.
Okay.
And that, for me, places a lot of the onus for that stewardship back each stage or back through each node or kind of back through that network. And so if I, as a consumer in a rich country, want my coffee to be sustainably produced, what ends up happening is that the onus to do that ends up sitting with smallholder farmers in different parts of the world. And I feel like that sort of responsibility often kind of gets pushed because you get each actor thinking about how they can affect change by requiring their suppliers to meet those standards. So that for me answers the question of the structure of the value chain having an implication for how the environment is looked after and thought about, and how it differentially affects different nodes in that value chain.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think about how the structure does rather than how value chains impact the environment. That particularly for me is about the structure. Is that making any sense?
It does make sense, and it's interesting. I hope I'm not sounding ignorant when I say like I've actually not heard that perspective before. I think it's a very unique view, or at least I haven't heard that. Looking at this as the onus being passed along and specifically being passed upstream in a value chain. I've heard somewhat of the other perspective, which is that when midstream actors set requirements for their suppliers, that's kind of viewed as a good thing, right? Because it attains the end goal of like more sustainability. But I really appreciate your understanding of this. I think that's really interesting. And yet,
I think there's always a nuance in it as well,
yeah,
isn't it? Like, yeah, that's a really great thing for the environment, but I think it's important for us to recognize that the onus then sits in a particular place. And
exactly.
how does that sit with all of the other things that producer, that supplier, that value chain expert in that particular node is operating.
Yeah.
And it doesn't, and meeting the requirements of that environmental stewardship could really enhance the production profitability for that producer or that cooperative or whatever it is. But nevertheless, it is a burden
Yeah.
that they may be willing to take on or not. And I feel like, yeah, there's always a nuance there.
Yeah, and so I want to share one more thought, which is oftentimes requirements for environmental stewardship as well as food safety. Um, it can be, to my understanding, it can be more burdensome or more difficult for smaller scale actors to meet those requirements. And so the structure of a value chain in terms of whether small actors are present in the value chain, whether they have access to benefit from a value chain has some kind of two-way, bi-directional implication for the environment as well. If you want to be more, and others can please push back on this if you have a different understanding, but if you want to be more inclusive of smaller scale actors, it may mean scaling back some of your expectations for environment, possibly. And again, I welcome others to disagree if you have a different thought.
I would say a lot of it is about having conversations and education throughout the value chain and with the smaller actors. So just seeing, having conversations and explaining something. So if someone who knows a lot about, I don't know, packaging and stuff can just sit in a room with like the actual person producing the product and then think about, okay, technically how long is this likely to last if we use a different kind of packaging, and then combining the kind of science with the agricultural knowledge and then the industry knowledge, and not just, not even including them in the conversation, and also not just assuming that that the most environmentally friendly thing is always going to be the most costly, because a lot of the time it's not, and there's ways of there's a balance, there's like several options, and there's a gray area whereby there can be efficiency and it can be effective, and at the same time it can be environmentally friendly. So I think it's conversations and brainstorming, being in the room with people.
I love what you're saying, and just to kind of fold back on the whole premise of this learning lab, it requires a view of the whole value chain in order to have those conversations and understand where those conversations ought to be had. And so this learning lab is really just about the benefit of maintaining a view of the whole value chain. I'm reading some good points in the chat, so thank you to everybody who is sharing comments about the materials that are used along the value chain, as we've said, deforestation that needs to occur in order for some of the activities of the value chain to take place. So thank you. And, please do continue to use the chat. It's much appreciated. Okay, so the next agenda item is, let's say we now are on the same page that having a view of the value chain in our research is important. We want a wide lens or a wide angle when approaching our agri-food research. But how can we do that in practice? And so we have put together 4 options in order to share some thoughts about how this can be done. Award is going to lead the first part of this. So Award, if you want to let me know when I should move forward in the slides, that would be great.
Okay, thank you, Ayala, for leading this good discussion. Hello, everyone again. So as Ayala has just spoken, there are several methods of collecting information if we are to do research in a value chain approach. So the first one is our qualitative methods. So these methods includes key informant interviews, focus group discussions, and observations. So they are conducted in a way that open discussions with key actors within the value chain is conducted for the aim of exploring a particular value chain. Can you go next? So the way they are designed, there are leading questions that are provided, and more questions are getting identified as more discussions are going on. So it's not predetermined. It's likely providing some few leading questions and gathering more information from the actors as the conversations go on. You can proceed the entire slide. So the new nodes or segments of the value chain are gathered and identified as interviews or discussions are going on. So can these methods have their strengths and weaknesses? Would somebody maybe tell what are the likely strength and weakness of the qualitative method? Anyone who can tell the likely strength or weakness of the qualitative approach? Okay, I can see from the chat, one of the strengths is to get the first-hand information. Yeah, I agree with that. Raghav?
Hi, so we just completed the study of value chains and we chose a qualitative approach. And I think one of the big challenges was trying to figure out how it's representative. So for example, when we did the maize value chain, we started from the farmer and then we asked, so again, which farmer you choose. So you have to make sure you're choosing a big, a small, a medium farmer, but also then just following the chain. So you ask the farmer, who did you sell to? And that person, who did you sell to? And which processor did you sell it to? And just following the chain. But we constantly struggled with the idea that we might be missing nodes. But then you also have to kind of account for the fact that there's limited funding. And so what's the best way to approach? So, one of the strengths is you kind of go deep into what's going on in the value chain, but the weaknesses is that is it representative and how much can you cover?
Yeah, thank you very much. Is there any other more contribution from anybody? Okay, if there is none, so among the strength of it is suitable for exploratory activity. Among the weaknesses is because it's exploratory and it's qualitative approach, it's difficult to do the quantitative analysis. So does not involve more numbers. This is among the weaknesses. The second approach is called stacked surveys. So different from the exploratory, this one is more organized in the sense that list of questions are prepared in advance and they're asked to different actors of the value chain in every node. So what is happening is within each node, a different questionnaire is constructed. And so that means the nodes of the value chain are predetermined of that particular value chain, and questions are prepared in each node. So the selection of the actors is random. So in each node, what is done is a listing is conducted to identify who are the actors within that node. So that list acts as a sampling frame where the sample is drawn from that list of actors in a particular node. So who would mention what are the likely strengths and weaknesses of this approach? Anybody to volunteer? Yes. Anybody? Yes, Marit?
I think in such an approach, it might be difficult to get a hold of people's thought processes, why they do what they do and stuff, because it's a survey kind of format, no?
Okay, any other idea? Sanjukta?
Yeah, hi. I would think that one possible weakness is how to make sure that the sampling is truly random, and also how would you find and also to develop a standard set of questions that you could ask to each actor. I would think those are two possible weaknesses.
Okay, thank you very much. Ernest? Is Ernest, did you raise
One of the
your hand?
challenges in one of the challenges in this approach is that you will have within the node someone who is linked horizontally horizontally with two other different nodes in front and behind, and the decisions that the agent will make in a particular node will be influenced by what is happening in the previous node, or the node that the the future contact. So capturing this information and interpretation will be a little bit challenging, but you have to pay attention on the interpretation of the information you get, because there is bound to be interlinkages, and the decisions or challenges and activities of each node is influenced by what happens in other nodes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for this contribution. Among the strength of this method is that it allows the quantitative analysis, because it gives a room of collecting numbers or information in terms of numbers. Among the weaknesses, on top of what you have mentioned, it relies more on the assumptions on how to conduct the listing of the actors in each node, because the process is predetermined before the actual survey. I think Ayala can proceed.
Okay, so I'll share the next two approaches. So the next approach is somewhat in contrast to the stacked surveys that Award presented, and this is called network-based sampling. It seems to be somewhat new in the literature, and it's pretty exciting. How does it work? You start with a small set of producers and follow transaction links. So what does that mean? You start with a small set of farmers, and you speak to each of them and ask, who did you recently sell your product to? Then you go and find those precise individuals, talk to them, interview them, and also ask them, who have you recently sold your product to? And then you find those individuals and talk to them. So you are sort of following linkages down the value chain. And this approach requires, I don't know if it requires no assumptions, but it definitely requires fewer assumptions about nodes that ought to be sampled in a study that takes account of the full value chain. How do you create a sample of actors at each node? Well, you don't have to do any sort of listing and random sampling with this approach. Instead, starting from, again, just a small set of farmers at the very start, you try to interview each buyer that is cited. So each individual, you go and find them and try to interview them. Now, you can imagine this could be endless, and so when would you stop? So far, people who have implemented this approach stop when they achieve saturation, when multiple respondents are citing the same individual as somebody that they have sold to recently. Or you stop when the individual that is cited is outside of your geographic scope. So we're all limited by resources. We can't, our research can't be infinite, and so there's some line drawn outside of which you're not going to pursue an individual beyond a certain geographic scope. This approach does allow for sampling weights to be generated to address the likelihood of being included in the sample. So this is kind of a new and different way of accounting for the full value chain in your research. Can anybody think of some strengths or weaknesses of this approach? Nola.
I would think it's probably quite expensive and time consuming.
Okay.
And then I also see that we have a couple of comments in the chat around trust and disclosure of client-based effect network-based sampling, and
Okay.
whether seasonality accounts for dynamism. And then another weakness being network-based sampling may lead to selection bias based on who the first group of producers may include.
I love all of these. Your point about tracking individuals. Let's see. Mercy made a point about tracking individuals and whether people feel comfortable doing that and whether they feel comfortable being tracked, because the person that their supplier mentioned their name. That might feel a little weird in research. Marit mentioned seasonality, and I completely agree with this because you're speaking to people at one moment in the year and asking them who they sold to recently. So you're getting a view of the value chain at that moment in the year, and it might not be the same structure of the value chain at a different moment. I like Nishmeet Singh's point about selection bias. I mean, so how did we choose that first group of producers? The truth is, I assume it's like somehow random within, at that start of the process, but it's a really good thing to think about. And also that if we're starting from a small group, then there might be scope for like one observation to have a large influence on the whole project. And Sanjukta mentioned that, larger firms may not be, it may not even be possible to access information. All right, so we have some criticisms. Raghav, do you want to say one more thing before we show the strengths and weaknesses that we had thought of before this great conversation?
Just a very quick point about strength. So I thought, what we were highlighting in the conversation as a weakness, which is tracking. In our study, that was the most helpful thing because people only spoke to us because somebody had referred us to them. So that's
Interesting.
actually a big positive because, especially the middle producers, intermediaries, like they were more than happy to talk only because they knew who sent us there.
That is so interesting. And it kind of comes back to, the assumptions that we often, we start out with assumptions about whether people would be open to this or not, and start out with assumptions about what are the nodes of the value chains that we want that exist and that we need to look at. And yet we should always be questioning our assumptions. So we thought about how one strength of this process, this approach is that we don't need a sampling frame. And so we don't need to start out with any assumptions about how to create a list of the population at each node of the value chain. It can be really challenging to come up with a list of think about to derive a sample using the stacked surveys. It can be challenging, and this process requires no assumptions in contrast. But as I think others mentioned, this can be complicated and it might be expensive. So we have both strengths and weaknesses. All right, moving on to the very last one that we want to talk about, and we'll do this quickly. You might have more thoughts about this and more awareness of what has been done, but we wanted to at least mention the idea of physically following a particular unit of product as it moves along the value chain. So you can imagine meeting a tomato farmer. They produce a crate of tomatoes, and then that changes hands over to a trader, and we accompany that crate of tomatoes as it moves over to a local market, and it changes hands again to a wholesaler, and we continue to stick with that crate of tomatoes as it moves down the value chain. And as we're doing this, we can record what happens, we can observe how much is actually lost, or or else what else happens to it. And we can interview those along the way that come into contact with our tomatoes. So this is just a thought. Maybe it's not even an original thought, I don't know. But what are some strengths and weaknesses of product tracking? What can you think about this? Marit?
I hope I'm not taking up too much space, but I was just wondering, when you have a crate of tomatoes, obviously every time it changes hands, it may also be dispersed into smaller quantities, no?
Okay.
So how are you going to keep track of all those actors involved? Like we studied the tomato sector in Kipuye Market in Kisumu, and they use this practice called jipogo. It's a Lua word that means to divide. And so once the crates get into the market space, the open air market, they are subdivided across so many different small traders that then do sales within the city that it becomes quite difficult maybe to keep track. But I do like the idea. I think it's fun. Maybe it's even possible in some ways. I'm just thinking about the logistics. Yeah.
You're right. You're right. And milk is like how would you follow milk? It obviously gets pooled together with other milk once it gets to the collection center. But it is a fun idea. Raghav, what are your thoughts about this idea?
We actually considered this for our study and then realized all the limitations to it. I think the first limitation is that it's great for perishables, so tomato, milk, great. But if you're doing maize or something that can be stored, then you kind of hit a roadblock and you have to wait for the item to move along the value chain. And the second weakness of this model is that, let's say you're tracing a crate of tomatoes, for example. So you'll only focus primarily on wherever those tomatoes land. So sort of one very linear value chain, as opposed to, some tomatoes might go for retail, some might go for canning, some might go for ketchup. And so those, you'll have to change the methodology to make sure that you also incorporate anytime the crates kind of diverge to different nodes.
You can't be just one person on this project. We would have to be a whole team somehow all together in the same study site doing this together. And you're right, it's probably a lot more complex than the simple words that are written on the screen. Is there anybody who has another thought that, especially people who have not yet spoken, we definitely want to hear your voice. We want to hear your thoughts and okay. So we thought as a strength that observation can be more accurate than asking for self-reports. It is uncertain at this point how much food loss actually happens in settings like sub-Saharan Africa and other parts of the world. There are bold claims that are made about the amount of food lost, but it's actually far less rigorously measured than one might assume. And so this kind of product tracking might allow for observation rather than relying on self-reports. And a weakness is that if we were able to do this successfully, it would be challenging to do it at a large scale. So it would be more like a case study of one crate of tomatoes, something like that. Okay, so we've covered 4 options for how to research the full value chain if we wanted to do a project that had this whole value chain perspective. Bayu, what are you thinking?
Yeah, inshallah in my dissertation plan, but yeah, it's a very lot time, yeah, very much time, very much time. I have to plan dissertations, and the first, in product tracking, I have the traceability about the quality milk based on storage and the time storage and the temperature as the impact for marinate meat quality. For example, steak, satay, and then rendang, soup, and etc. In second plans, I have I have the research about the quality of uh, beef fat, or in like tallow, with measurement with C, we analyze to from we analyze from body condition score, weight body, and the age of body cow in Indonesia. That's it. Inshallah.
Thank you. Thanks for sharing research that you have done on value chains. It's
You're
very
welcome,
interesting.
Ayala, because this is not implement in Indonesia. We implement from many researchers, but it have much research about that. Not too
Thank you.
full.
Alicia,
You're
what are your
welcome, yeah.
thoughts? Alicia, what are your thoughts?
I wanted to talk about weakness of product tracking.
Okay.
My point is that incorrect data entry can lead to difficulty in tracking where the products are coming from. Incorrect data entry.
Okay.
Also, the issue of training requirement. Employees need to be trained to use tracking system. Hello?
Yeah. We can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
Alicia, we can hear you.
Yeah, training requirement. Employees need training to use tracking system effectively, because these instruments and tools used for tracking those products need experienced person who can handle them.
Yeah.
So there is need of training them, those who handle the tools. So it depends on technology. Organization may struggle if the system become unavailable.
Understood. Thank you very much, Alicia. So we've covered these 4 ideas. Before we move on to talk about the school milk value chain in particular in Uganda, does anyone have any last idea about other ways to study the full value chain? If not, I'll just check the chat, and if not, we can just move on. Shivani is going to share with us something about the school milk value chain, the school milk program in Uganda, because we're going to use this as a foundation or a focus in breakout rooms to brainstorm research questions that we could ask. So let's hear about the school milk value chain. Shivani?
Thank you very much, Ayala. So we have had lots of interesting responses in the chat, and I really enjoyed reading them. So building on the discussion around agri-food value chains, I would like to bring in the example of the school milk program in Uganda and explore how looking at the entire value chain can help us understand the program's effectiveness, sustainability, and durability. So, to understand the school milk program, let's first look at the context of milk consumption patterns in Uganda. So, across Africa, the range of recommended serving frequencies or amounts for dairy include daily intake or 1 to 2 servings per day, 400 to 500 milliliters per day, or in moderation, with serving sizes commonly defined as 1 cup or 250 milliliters of milk, or yogurt, or 28 grams of cheese, or 30 grams of cottage cheese. So basically, across different dietary guidelines, recommended milk intake varies from daily consumption to intake in moderation. So where serving sizes are specified, a common reference point is 1 cup of milk, 250 mLs per day. So this graph here shows the mean daily milk intake among children in Uganda aged between 6 to 10 years from 1990 to 2018. So we see that milk consumption increased overall, rising from 46.3 grams per day in 1990 to around 66.5 grams per day in 2018. So there was a notable increase, which we can see here from 2000 to 2010, followed by a temporary decline and then a recovery by 2018. However, average milk consumption remains well below the recommended levels. Now, next slide, please. Yeah. Beyond the overall trend, let us look at differences in who is consuming the milk. The data here shows a clear difference by place of residence. We see here that children in urban areas consume considerably more milk, around 92 grams per day, compared with about 59 grams per day among rural children. On the other hand, yes, the gender difference in milk consumption is much smaller. Now, this overall provides important context for understanding why Uganda has invested in school milk programs. So, the school milk program emerged from the intersection of two primary needs, I would say: improving children's access to nutritious foods and creating stronger markets for Uganda's growing dairy sector. So, the school milk project in Uganda has been funded by the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs and implemented by SNV, a non-profit international development organization. And this initiative was a part of a larger value chain development activity called the Inclusive Dairy Enterprise, the TIDE project. So, to give a bit of context, the school milk project in Uganda started in 2016 in western and southwestern regions of Uganda. The idea was not only to provide milk to children in schools, but also to strengthen the dairy sector by improving production and creating a reliable market for smallholder dairy farmers. Also aligned with the Uganda's national policy and the parent-led school feeding program, the school milk project follows a community-driven approach where parents and school communities they raise funds to purchase milk directly from producers or milk aggregators. Now, this project saw a very rapid growth as additional schools desired to participate. So, a second phase of the project took place in the Kampala metropolitan area. So, yeah. So, Uganda's school milk program operates through two main modalities. Let's look at the first modality, which is a community-based model that connects schools directly with the local dairy producers. So the school milk project, as I mentioned previously, began in selected districts in western and southwestern Uganda and was launched as a pilot parent-led initiative. Phase 1 of the program, this began in southwestern Uganda, which is considered as the country's breadbasket. And despite its reputation as a producer of food, the region has one of the country's highest levels of malnutrition because of much of its production ending up in the markets in neighboring countries. So, back to the first modality. Firstly, to encourage participation, some resources were allocated towards community mobilization. A community awareness campaign took place through parent-teacher association meetings and other local gatherings to encourage parents to participate in the school feeding program. The pilot began in 60 schools across 6 districts. So, beginning with 50,000 learners in 2016, the program expanded to 100,000 students within 2 years and reached to 300,000 students by the end of the third year. In addition, matching grants were provided to schools to support the construction of kitchens and improve infrastructure. Now, grants were initially offered to any school, though conditions were later introduced. This initiative experienced rapid expansion as schools outside the pilot, they also expressed interest in joining, influenced at least in part by the visible improvements that they saw in other participating schools where kitchens, cooking utensils, and fuel-efficient stoves had been introduced. Next, the supply chain for the school milk project. Let's look at the supply chain. It initially relied on a simple and localized model. For example, in rural areas, schools were directly linked with nearby milk producers, sometimes through farmer cooperatives or small aggregators that helped distribute the milk. Next, so schools purchased this raw cow milk from cooperatives, boiled it, and in some cases, prepared porridge by adding maize or some other type of flour, or the school served boiled cow's milk with bread to the children. Next, so this model allowed for easy coordination due to its community-based approach, with parents, schools, and local dairy suppliers working closely together. However, its reliance on local resource mobilization and direct procurement might make it relatively small scale and localized, which could limit expansion. Next slide. Now let us look at the second modality, which is a processor-driven model that uses formal dairy supply chains. So this was also known as the phase two of the school milk project program, introduced a processor-driven model in the Kampala metropolitan area, covering the capital and the two surrounding districts. So unlike the activities in southwestern Uganda, this phase emphasized the use of processed and packaged milk. So it expanded access to school milk in urban and peri-urban settings and sort of refashioned the program into a more scalable and standardized model. Now, to pilot this model, the program partnered with three Uganda's largest milk processors, Pearl Dairy, Brookside, and Jesa. So, in the Kampala metropolitan area, parents in each school purchased the milk directly, and the three major milk processors supplied packaged milk and yogurt to the schools. So, these processors also reduced prices to about 30% below supermarket levels to encourage uptake. Now, by 2024, more than 15 learners in the metropolitan area were receiving milk and yogurt. And by the end of phase two, the school milk project, inclusive of its activities in both southwestern Uganda and Kampala metropolitan area, had expanded to reach nearly 1 million students, integrating school milk into regular school meals. Now, though the SNV-led project has now concluded, the program is continuing under the leadership of the government of Uganda. So broadly, the program supported farmers in improving milk production and productivity. It also mobilized communities and encouraged investments to enhance dairy production in Uganda. Farmer trainings were also provided through the matching grant system that I spoke about. Another component of the program focused on animal nutrition, supporting farmers to grow forage crops and other seeds to improve livestock feed. Another key focus was on to both reduce malnutrition and short-term hunger through the provision of milk at school, and to also position schools as a stable market for smallholder farmers. So in this way, the school milk initiative was just one component for a larger dairy-focused program. So I would just like to say a few words about this slide, the next slide. Yeah. So why do we want to look at the full value chain? When we study a school milk program, I think it is important to look beyond the classroom and consider the full and entire journey of milk from cow to the classroom. So this means examining how milk is produced, collected, processed, stored, and delivered. We all discussed so many nodes of the value chain initially, and including how to improve production, maintain quality, and reduce waste, and ensure safe dairy products reach children. So, yes, over to you, Ayala.
Okay, so Thank you for staying with us, this far in the journey of this learning lab. So we're going to break out into smaller conversations in order to make more room for more voices. There are some people who haven't spoken yet, and we really want every person to speak at least once today. The challenge is imagine that you see a call for proposals to study about the school milk program in Uganda. So you would have some amount of resources to study about this. And you know that the school milk program cares about multiple topics: nutrition, food safety. It cares about the environment, and it cares about socioeconomic inclusivity. And you now have like a full interest in the whole value chain from cow to classroom. So our goal in this breakout rooms is to brainstorm a list of research questions that you can ask, a list of questions that we can put forth to apply for funding. We can talk about what these questions are, what are the hypotheses, how we would want to study them. We have these three topics: nutrition, food safety, environment, socioeconomic inclusivity. Each breakout room will decide what to discuss among these topics. So you could focus on just one, or you could focus on all three of the topics. I think let's check on our time. Okay, we had intended for 20 minutes, but let's take 15 minutes to discuss this. Let's take 15 minutes to discuss this and see if we can, in breakout rooms, come up together with a list of questions. And then in 15 minutes, we'll reconvene and wrap up. So does anyone have any questions about what we're going to do in the breakout room? Alicia, do you have a question or comment?
Yes. I am really interested with what she has said about Uganda. You know, Uganda and Tanzania is very close. Uganda is our neighboring country. And what happening there can reflect what is happening in Tanzania. So I have one question to the presenter, Shivan. You have said that there is a gender issue in milk value chain production, and I just want to know what stage of milk chain production there is a difference in gender between men and women. You have said that, and why? That is my question.
So I have a thought. Shivani, we'll give you a chance to respond to this, but I also think, Alicia, that this is a great question, a great research question. It might not be a question that we already know the answer to, but it would be a great research project. And so I think that in your breakout room, that can be the first research question we list. Shivani, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, Alicia, thank you very much for that question. I think it fits within the socio-economic inclusivity aspect and how the structure of the school milk value chain can impact socio-economic inclusivity, and it fits there entirely. What I discussed in the presentation was the gender differences in milk consumption among children aged 6 to 10 years. And there was not much of a difference really between the mean daily intake of milk among girls and boys. So the uh, that was the chart that I was talking about. But yes, let's discuss this point in the breakout rooms, and I think we will have some interesting discussion around how women and men are included in the milk value chain and where exactly is the gap that we observe.
Okay, so Nola, can we break into two rooms and we'll try to have some discussion together.
Great, I'll open the breakout rooms now.
Thank you. Shivani and Award, what I'm thinking of is to wrap this up, we could ask each of our breakout rooms to share 1 or 2 points that surfaced in the conversation, or 1 or 2 extra thoughts that people have that they didn't get a chance to share. And then we can conclude and tie this off. Okay, so in room number 1, which I think had Shivani and Award, does anybody want to volunteer to share anything that you discussed or any thought that you have left over?
Shavani, can I begin maybe with 2 or 3, and then you will share what you noted?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. It was actually a very nice discussion with so many questions coming out. Some of them were thinking of who are the key actors in the milk value chain and what are they doing? What are their main activities? In relation to that is how are the activities impacting their livelihoods? Are they getting profit from what the activity they are doing? Or are they generating some income? And also related to this again is among these key actors, how is their gender patterns? How many are male, how many are female, and how do profit is generated or income is generated across the gender? Another question regarding to nutrition was what is the impact of school feeding program on nutrition across different age groups and classes of the students or beneficiaries? And the last one that I've noted for now is looking on the a comparative analysis between the 2 programs in terms of the of food safety, like which program maintain food milk safety compared to the other one, and what can be done to improve, or which one is better to adopt and scale up. Yeah, these are few of the many that I have. Back to you, Shivan.
Thank you very much, Eva. Just adding a few of the interesting research questions that we had in breakout room too. So there was a question about who is the dominant participant in the entire agri-food value chain. So what kind of analysis would help us identify who is the dominant one and who is the less dominant one? There was another important research question about how can we integrate nutrition education through food diaries at the school level and educate children about the nutritional benefits of milk or the school meals that they are consuming, and how can we do repeat recalls or quantified food frequency questionnaires, integrate them into surveys and capture this information. There was also an interesting question about, will you consider a local value chain or a processor driven or a different kind of a value chain? Then there was a technical food safety related research question about, there are certain parameters that can be measured in case of milk, but the bacterial load in milk, it's complicated. And so a comparative analysis of this aspect would be helpful, and which of the approaches to measure the bacterial load is safer and much effective. These were some really interesting research questions that came up in the breakout rooms. And yeah, please feel free to share any additional questions that you may have now.
Does anyone from the other breakout room where I was present want to share any question that seemed particularly interesting to you? I know there were a few that really stood out to me.
May I come in?
Please.
This is Sunita. Yeah, so one of the questions that one of the aspects that we discussed was regarding gender. And this is based on my experience with dairy farmers. So where a majority of the activities like taking care of the animals, feeding them, bathing them, drawing milk is done by women, while it is taken to the cooperative collection center by men and the money is collected by men. So maybe we can, have a question where we can say how is labor ownership or decision making happening in the um, milk supply chain in a urban school program, or does participation in this school milk program enhance women's economic empowerment and access to dairy income, because most of the times the money doesn't reach their hands. So I just thought, if this can be one of the questions we can ask.
Excellent. Really, not just a good question, but you phrased it really nicely.
Thank you.
Anyone else for a last thought from the room where I was in? I can share that one question. So there were a number of questions that I really liked, but one that that struck me is how is a framing of food safety, looking across the value chain to identify what actors are doing to support and preserve the food safety of the milk. So not looking at who is introducing threats to food safety, but looking at what actors are doing to improve the food safety. I really liked that. And it was also a question that kind of humbled me, because I think it's just a really nice way of thinking about it. Any last thoughts before we close off?
Ma'am Ayala,
Yes.
I have the interest about the food security in what's about the storage model to increase the quality of milk in Indonesia and our in the many country. We have the know that the storage of milk has three system. If UHT, ultra high temperature, will be stayed in temperature room or chilling room. And sterile milk will be just in chilling that storage room, and many product milk products will safe in chilling room, or maybe in chilling room or temperature room based on the characteristic, the method. So we have many things that the storage of milk is the important to making the food product will be high quality.
Thank you.
You. Yeah, madam.
Okay, wonderful. So we have this view from Indonesia. We have a sense from this learning lab that there's a lot of really interesting research questions we can look at. I hope that we have some feeling of connection to one another, that we have met one another, and maybe our paths will cross again in the future, and we may be helpful to one another in ways we can't even anticipate yet. I want to close off this learning lab and just thank everybody for your participation and for your patience and your interest. So thank you. Have a good rest of your day.